what is going on? I taught this morning. That's about what's going on.
Yes, I know. I was there.
So what are we going to talk about, Benson?
We don't want to talk about anything.
So what do you have a plan or an inclination?
No, not so much. The intended format for this podcast is just me talking to people.
Okay.
Which ideally speaking, I would want it. They're not exactly interviews,
right?
But more conversations.
Okay.
So just like we can talk about whatever, but I might. Again, ideally speaking, they're conversations, but I tend to skew them just a little bit towards interviews.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you visited the podcast page or anything.
I did not have a chance yet.
The description, as people view it, they can read, the reason I'm doing this is to feed my curiosity, connect with people, and sometimes get out of the house.
all good things. So I hope I'm an interesting interlocutor here. We could talk about anything. It doesn't have to be about me. So
no, not really.
Okay.
No. I mean, it's ultimately up to me to choose who to have on.
Right.
And whoever I choose to have on tends to be rather interesting. Or at least I think they tend to be rather interesting.
Wow. I may not share your opinion about me, but we'll see. We'll see if you've blown it. That could be interesting too. So, we could go down some real rabbit holes here because, I could probably talk about my kids for an hour, but I'm not sure anyone would be interested in that. So what should we start on?
I don't know. Well, sometimes I have like a little soft opener where like to ease the tension in case people are uncomfortable with speaking into a microphone that's in front of their face.
Right.
I might ask them if they like pickles.
I do like pickles. I like all pickled things.
Really?
In fact, it's sort of important. In fact, I had a pickle with my dinner last night.
Cool.
Which, since we're talking about pickles, it was a conventional, cucumber. Pickled cucumber.
That was formerly a cucumber.
Yeah, that's right. The artist formerly known as a cucumber. The pickle formerly known as a cucumber. So, right. So I bit it and ate it as a pickle for a while, but we also had some lovely winter squash and other stuff. So then I kind of chopped it up and mixed it with those other things. So I'm speaking in the royal family we here. We eat pickles of all kinds, regular cucumbered pickles. We like kimchi of various kinds. So all sorts of pickled, treated vegetable products. Right. I'm all for.
Yeah. Although more specifically about pickles, is there a particular kind of pickle you would prefer? Because I find there are a lot of people who say are only like all about dill pickles. Only dill pickles. I
like dill pickles. I'm not a huge fan of sweet or sweet and sour pickles.
Or like bread and butter pickles.
Right, which I consider sort of sweet pickles. Yeah. It depends. Those they have their place, like in a particular kind of sandwich on a hamburger. Not really a meat eater, turkey burger, I guess. I could have a bread and butter pickle or a sweet and sour pickle.
That is still meat, Mark.
Oh no, that's right. Not a red meat eater.
All right,
that's right.
Because at least for me, I'm not a very picky eater. So whenever I find pickles on a thing, I'm just like, yeah, they're pickles. They taste like pickles. They're fine. I don't have much of anything against, say, pickles that are not dill pickles.
Got it. You don't have strong feelings about pickle particularities.
Not really. It's just like I like pickles. If they taste like pickles, they're pickles to me.
Right.
Because they are pickles.
See, I'm kind of interested in pickles as an idea, right? So, like foodways style or, like old home country style. So you've got all these vegetables that are coming seasonally, more in one season than you want, fewer in another season, when you might need them. So, you got a lot of green beans. You don't know what the hell to do with all your green beans. So you pickle green beans. Or, you got a lot of cucumbers, which quite honestly, like we could talk about cucumbers, not a super interesting vegetable. More interesting pickled probably than fresh. I'm sure there are cucumber lovers who would...
Would you call cucumbers a vegetable?
Is it technically a fruit?
I would think it's a fruit.
You're going to pull that on me? Okay.
I think it's because, what is it? The difference is fruits have seeds in them, right?
So squash is a fruit?
I guess they're like, but we would call that along with like pumpkins, like winter vegetables or something.
Right, because vegetable is usually a savory category for us, right?
Yeah, but
tomatoes being the test case where maybe.
Well, in the case of tomatoes, I guess
you can pickle tomatoes. I just want to point out, just for the record.
I think, but biologically speaking, tomatoes are fruits,
right?
But they're used more in a culinary context. They're used more as a vegetable,
right?
Are they not?
Well, maybe. I mean, doesn't it? I kind of stand by my savory sweet distinction, right? Not that tomatoes aren't sweet, but things that we think of as main course foods, right? Savory grown things we tend to put in the vegetable category. Even if you can cook fruit and you can eat vegetables raw. You can make compotes and sauces out of fruits just like you might out of, basil or tomatoes. I think of the vegetable fruit thing like vernacularly, like everyday talk wise, as being a sweet versus non-sweet thing mostly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I still want to talk about pickled foods. I want to know what other pickled foods you like, Benson. Are you like just a dill pickle cucumber eater?
Well, like I said, I have no problem against different types of pickles.
Right.
I'm just like other pickles.
Right.
But
when you say pickle, you're talking exclusively about pickled cucumbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
because you can pickle.
I don't think
green beans. You can pickle anything. We have pickled garlic in my house.
Cool.
Yeah, it's good for cooking.
Well, I guess I don't have much experience in pickled foods that are not cucumbers, that are not formerly cucumbers.
Got it.
And so, wait, is sauerkraut kind of...
Well, that's an interesting category. Yeah, I think of that. I just had this will tell you how interesting my family life is. We just had this like small dispute in my family the other night because my wife Lynn we had sauerkraut in something we were eating. And we were talking about whether that was pickled or not. And
it's pickled cabbage or something.
Yeah. And then the difference between people who are real foodies who know what they're talking about, if they listen to this podcast, it's just going to be... It's embarrassing.
We're just going to be yelling at their phones. We're
embarrassing ourselves.
Going like, no!
That's right. That's right. If you're lucky enough to have listeners, your comments page is going to explode. Or whatever it is. But... yeah, I mean, there are foods that you pickle without having cooked them or prepped them, right? And I think that's true of cucumbers. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But you can pickle cabbage without cooking it, but then you can sort of cook cabbage and then do some kind of pickling thing with it. I think sauerkraut, this is what we're disagreeing about. See, now I'm taking my wife's side because I was saying I thought sauerkraut had not been cooked before it was prepared as a pickled cabbage thing, but maybe it is. I'm not sure. But you can also, you can eat pickled eggs, and I believe those are hard-boiled before they're pickled. But again,
probably,
yeah,
because you would eat them like they were hard-boiled,
right? Yeah,
yeah, like you peel it, and it's a solid egg,
right? I'm thinking about other pickled things now. Pickled peppers, you can pick a peck of pickled peppers. You can pickle anything. See, you really there's no. I mean, it's curing, right? Like isn't this like a continuum? Like cured meats? Isn't there like a relationship between sort of cured products using salt and age, and sometimes not salt, sugar to like cure foods so that they are preserved? It's just about preserving foods. That's the same thing as pickling, right? Kind
of, yes, because you would.
So is pepperoni pickled meat?
I mean, you would use the verb brine, or that you refer to the solution which is submerged as a brine.
Right.
So, and you brine, in the verbiage usage, you brine cucumbers to become pickles.
Right.
In a pickling solution.
Yes. And then you can metaphorically talk about people being pickled, meaning drunk, meaning they're brined.
Wait, hold on.
But not in salt, but in liquor, right? You don't know that location?
I've never heard of describing people as pickled.
Oh yeah, to be pickled.
Unless they were a pickle.
No, to be pickled is to be drunk.
What?
Like soused.
From what region or country is that vernacular common?
Well, that's interesting. It may be less region vernacular. It may be like the past as another country. Like I know my parents' generation and before that, I think you can see old movies where people are described as pickled.
I mean, I've heard other terms for people being drunk, like say drunk,
right,
or sauced, cocked,
right.
In British English, pissed,
right.
And
I'm not sure it's really making the rounds among college students in the 21st century. Granted, pickled that is, but yeah, no, it's. See, we were just talking about the OED this morning in our Shakespeare class, the Oxford English Dictionary. And if we were better equipped here, I could look it up. But yeah, we have to check out pickled in the OED. There will definitely be some kind of sub definition that refers to people being intoxicated.
They were pickling things even back then?
Pickling back when? Are we talking about being pickled drunk, or are we talking about pickling?
Just like I imagine
ancient. Pickling is ancient.
Okay,
yes.
The act of pickling foods is ancient.
The act of, doing things to preserve. So this speaks to the part of it that's interesting to me, right? The history part, like the
etymology.
People, well, I'm just talking about people using salt or other things to preserve foods, right? For sustenance, because it's the summer now and we've got these things, but it'll be the winter soon and we won't. Or we have an abundance of, you name it, fish, and we can't eat it all now, so either it rots or we figure out some way to sort of keep it for tomorrow or a week from now. That's crazy ancient. And most of it goes back to salt. There's a book about salt called Salt. You know, there was this kind of vogue for thing.
It got adapted in that movie with Angelina Jolie called Salt.
Is there a movie with Angelina Jolie called Salt? You would know, of course.
It was, I think it was from like 2010 or something like that. And it was directed by Philip Noyce.
Okay.
He did stuff like The Quiet American with Michael Caine.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
I heard it was decent. Okay. And it's like Angelina Jolie is some kind of black ops mercenary secret agent to like kills people or something.
Okay.
I don't know.
And this relates to salt how?
Because the movie is called Salt.
I mean, like there's the Salt Arms Treaty, but that's a different kind of salt. Yeah, salt. Salt's interesting. So this salt book is about, the history of people making salt and using salt. Sort of like we were talking about with textiles this morning. Again, reference to our class that none of your listeners will know or care about. But just like textiles were really valuable commodities, salt was. Like people made salt.
Yeah.
And sold it. It was used as currency sometimes.
Yeah, salt was It was valuable.
Yeah.
It was to the point where even before, like say, modern currency systems were invented, developed, introduced.
Yeah.
It was all about bartering stuff like things of value. You had this goat,
right?
This block of salt, your daughter. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could put stuff in salt, like vegetables, make brine, vegetables like we're discussing, or you could you could use it to preserve stuff. I think you could put a whole like goat carcass in a tub of salt and it would keep it good. So salt. The power of salt. I'm just going to say I just want it out there that you asked me a question about pickles. So should there be any dispute or complaints about the subject of our conversation, I take no responsibility.
Well, guess what? If you don't like this, you can turn it off. You don't have to listen to this.
That's right.
Yeah, your freedom as a listener to free content means you can turn it off whenever you like.
That's right. You have no one to blame but yourself if you're listening. It's kind of ultimate freedom.
I myself have no one to blame but myself for allowing it to happen.
That's right. That's how this gets turned back around.
For making the running joke of asking people if they like pickles.
That's right. Right. And for inviting me on as a guest where you found someone who actually wanted to talk about pickles for a while. That's a low probability event.
On one of my earlier guests, we did end up talking about pickles for a couple of minutes. And, we were talking about pickles. It wasn't just hey, do you like pickles? Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. Maybe this is you're developing. I mean, maybe this is the emerging theme of your podcast, Benson. It's the Pickles podcast. Yeah.
Well,
there's got this is the way. Isn't this the way? I mean, this is my ignorance. This is the way the online world works, right? Like, there's got to be some interesting, subgroup, subculture of like pickle fanatics, pickle lovers out there.
Probably.
They don't even know that they need it, but they're waiting for the Pickles podcast. This could be it. It could be your moment.
Maybe I could develop a whole nother podcast just talking about pickles.
That's right.
Yes.
But you'd like to move on, which I get.
Well, I don't care. But I'm just saying that, if I were to say, try to incorporate a theme of pickles into this show, I would have to go through a lot of work of, like, say, changing my artwork, retitling the show, and
just too much
changing
trouble.
the description.
Yeah, I know. Pickle, it's a commitment, Pickles.
I don't know if you read my email, but this podcast is called The Podcast with Benson Ty.
Right.
So
you'd have to add the word pickles.
Or
pickles
just do the thing where, like, make a huge P and then have it be the first P for 2 words, podcast and pickles.
Yes. Or you could even have, like, if you are yourself talented in the graphic arts or know someone who is, you could like, the P could be a pickle. I guess it's hard to imagine. Or it could be made of pickles.
I suppose
there are people who can do this.
The stalk of the P could be a pickle.
There you go.
So, and then
I'm just chock full of good
then you can use
this.
a pickle chip as the round bit of the P.
Yeah. Or as the O in podcast.
Yeah.
See? Anything can develop a kind of plausibility if you talk about it long enough. It's kind of sort of terrifying. I think that's how the Trump presidency happened. But we shouldn't talk about politics. That is not my aim.
I mean, we could, but I'd rather not.
Yeah, let's talk about, what should we talk about now? Should we talk about, I haven't seen you all summer pretty much. What do you do during the summer? Did you read? Are you a reader?
Okay, here's the thing.
Okay.
I've told Dr. Cinch this.
Oh.
I don't read very much. I don't read very much in the traditional sense.
I'm just laughing, reader, listener, because Benson is, among his many other endeavors and talents, he's an English major.
Yeah,
so.
which is
full disclosure.
Full disclosure, I'm an English major who doesn't read much. But I think I don't very much read physical books that often. Mm-hmm. I used to be really big into reading.
Do you do books on tape?
I listen to audiobooks a lot.
Okay.
I think the reason for that is because with the advent of, like, the internet,
right,
me having a smartphone, I feel like my consciousness is so splintered.
Right.
My attention span has dwindled almost to nothing, and my mind is so not where it needs to be ever.
Right.
I don't have the patience to
sit down and
read a physical book.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Much anymore.
Yeah.
The last thing I read front to back physically, like a book, was Bob Dylan's memoir.
Okay.
Chronicles Volume 1. That might have been 3 or 4 years ago.
Interesting. So you're sort of giving yourself as evidence of this thing that people are fearful of, which is kind of shift in the way that people think or interact with text as a product of technological change, which is interesting. I mean, that's always been true. Like, I'm concerned about it, but some of my concern is purely selfish because I lived in an era where books, text consumed in that way, in an era when that was important. So I don't know. I don't want to be too glib about this. On the one hand, I think books are important. I like to read books. I actually prefer to read physical books. I have an e-reader, which is fine. I don't mind using it, but especially with books I like, the physical consumption of books and my memory of where things are and my experience of reading suffers, I think, when I use an e-reader. But there's an aspect of, I'm aware that there's an aspect of nostalgia for people having a certain relationship with books. It's a little bit like people being nostalgic, or I shouldn't say it is. I should say it might be like people being nostalgic for, 8-track tapes or LPs. Like it's, that medium is tied up with people's memories of their life in a certain era of time, blah, blah, blah. But that said, I like physical books. I too feel like it's harder for me to sustain the attention than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And I assume that's partly a function of having a smartphone and computer stuff and so on. Maybe it's a function of habit because I'm older than you are, Benson, but I won't say how old. Although I think you know. I'm just being coy. I can usually find my way back into that mode, and I like that mode of sort of what you were describing, like being immersed in a book, being able to sort of read at length for a period of time, kind of being immersed in that word world. It's hard for me to do during the school year with teaching and other things, but it's usually sometimes during breaks, but especially during summers that I can get some reading done. But it's, you know, it's like a little like exercising for me. Like when you haven't done it for a while, you do have to sort of cultivate the habit and get, you know, sort of comfortable doing it again. And it takes a little time.
So I'm in the middle of reading Stephen King's On Writing, which I started what might have been last year before I entered the university in fall 2018.
Got it.
And, you know, when I was reading it, I did feel I had to become reaccustomed to reading.
Right.
And I suppose another facet of my experience as a reader that makes it difficult for me to read is that, well, I read a lot as a kid and did not venture into the outside world. And so I developed really terrible vision.
Oh, interesting.
Perhaps because I was staying inside and reading all the time.
Right.
And so when I am reading, if I'm reading for a long time because I'm wrapped up in the book, my vision gets everything becomes a bit smaller.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I get a headache. And that happens whether I'm wearing my contact lenses or just my glasses. Like, my glasses are so thick that if I wear them for too long, staring at a particular thing, or just wear them too long in general,
right,
I'm gonna get a headache. And then wearing my contacts for a bit too long is not good either.
Right.
And it's just that the act of focusing on one thing, just like a foot from your face.
Right.
It at some point I'm gonna get a headache. After like an hour, 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's all exacerbated by screen stuff too.
Oh yeah, especially because I do a lot of work on, say, a computer, looking at a screen.
Right.
Writing papers, reading stuff, editing my podcast.
Oh, right. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find. I guess I kind of read for a living, so that's part of it. Since I'm an English professor, so there's that side of it. But it's always been kind of therapeutic for me. Like, I feel like I learn a lot. I enjoy it, so it's pleasure. I was just reading this. I was Googling Schopenhauer because I've never really. He's a 19th century German philosopher. He's a 19th century German philosopher. I don't know a lot about him either. My older kid is a philosophy major. So he's in this course on Schopenhauer's ethics, which I'm kind of tickled by, but I felt like, okay.
Where's he going?
He's at Brown. Oh, okay. And he's a philosophy and econ double concentrator, I guess they call it.
That's weird.
Yeah, he's an interesting kid. I mean, it's interesting that he's doing stuff in college that isn't stuff that you can do in high school, because I kind of would have predicted that. Like, the philosophy major doesn't surprise me a whole lot. I don't think it would offend him to learn that. We've kind of talked about that. But I sort of thought that when he got to college, if he took a philosophy class, he would like it. So
I suppose
it's validating to me personally. It's all about me.
Me calling your kid weird, I'm one to talk. But
no, that doesn't bother me. He is weird. I'm weird too.
I'm majoring in film and English.
That's right.
And a minor in music.
That's right. So you're.
It's, if anything, at least one of his majors is useful. Well, none of mine are.
That's right. Yeah, you're not exactly pursuing the careerist path, are you, Benson? Unless you're going to end up being one of these like multimedia production. Maybe you're going to be some huge entertainment conglomerate success story, and then
I don't know. Maybe.
Then it'll feel like it was always secretly pre-professional after all.
I don't know. I mean, in an earlier part of my life, I was majoring in a STEM field. So that used to be me, but now it's more about arts and stuff.
Right. I presume because you like that stuff better, or it just makes you happier?
Pretty much.
Yep. That makes sense.
Because I don't know if you read that personal essay I wrote that won awards.
Oh yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I did.
That was all about how, just because I'm Asian and stuff, I thought, sciences, because that makes sense.
Right.
And then at some point I became disillusioned with my education and this plan to become, at the time I wanted to be an astrophysicist.
Okay.
And, it all fell apart. I'm like, what the hell do I do? What do I want to do? And, I realized it's arts and entertainment. Those are the things that never really mattered to me. Yeah, so I went all in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, the smart ass in me, I thought what you were going to say was when all that came crashing down, you realized what you wanted to do was the Pickles podcast. That would have been the right answer. Well, I started my career as an engineer.
Did you?
My college career, yeah. Almost half my college career I did math and science and engineering, chemical engineering.
Really?
Yep.
What changed?
Well, it's about reading. I mean, so what I was doing all that time, I was taking other stuff. I was doing French.
First of all, where did you go for undergrad?
Classes. I was undergraduate at Princeton.
Mm-hmm.
And I went there in part because they had a good chemical engineering program, although it's not clear that really matters a whole lot when you're 18 and you're first venturing off to college. But anyway, so I did a lot of math and science, like physics, chemistry, calculus, all that stuff you have to do to be an engineer. And I did that for about a year and a half. But I was taking, you have to do, there's a general education curriculum, so you have to do some other things too. And I was doing some lit classes. And we had long reading periods, long exam periods. I think this is still the schedule at Princeton. So you have a semester that runs in the fall, for instance, from September through December. You actually go home for like a holiday break, winter break, and then you come back for exam period in January. And you have like 2 weeks of reading period, and then you have your final exams from the fall. Then you go home again for a week, and then you come back and the spring semester starts. It's kind of a weird animal. So there are these long, they call them reading periods. And in theory, you're sort of studying for exams, sometimes writing papers, because you can have papers that for your fall classes that aren't due until that January finals time. And I would just go to the library and check out books and read. Not only, I studied for my exams, but I did a lot of reading during those couple of weeks. And at some point, I was kind of slow on the uptake. It just dawned on me that I had peers who were doing that too, but they were actually getting credit for the reading. And like you, I think I just had it's not that I didn't like math and science because I did, but I also, it's funny because people talk about the STEM push being a recent phenomenon, but, I was in high school in the 80s and it was still the case that, if you're a serious student, you were doing science and math. That was sometimes because the more rigorous courses were the science and math courses. I had some good English teachers too, but it's hard to say. Like there was no explicit suggestion that studying a foreign language or caring about English or history wasn't serious, but there was a clear culture, sometimes spoken, sometimes unspoken, that the good students did, the better students did these other things. And I wasn't a super reflective, mature in that sense 17-year-old. So I'm not sure what I was thinking when I thought I was doing chemical engineering. I had nothing against math and science, but it was mostly a choice that seemed like the right kind of choice for someone to make. Engineers, that's good. My parents seem happy about it.
Yeah.
They get jobs, they make money.
And then they weren't when you switched to English?
To my parents' credit, my mom took college courses but never went to college formally. Her father wouldn't let her. One of these gender stories. She wanted to go to school for nursing, and her father wouldn't let her go and clean other people's bedpans, apparently. So she never went to college, even though she was very smart. She was a big reader. My father went very late. He was in the military, Korean War era, and then got GI Bill money, I guess, and then had to work his way through school. So he didn't graduate from college until he was 32. So they could have been very anxious careerists. And that would have made sense in some ways if they were concerned about me getting a college education that was going to lead to a particular job. I don't know quite what they were thinking, but they were very polite about it. I remember calling them to tell them that I was going to make this switch, and they just trusted me, I guess. It's funny thinking about your parents in retrospect. You may be too young for this, Benson. I have kids now, but I think about things my parents did and didn't do, and it's really hard for me to know. especially being a parent now where you bumble around so much in the choices you make, it's hard for me to know how much of what they did was intentional and how much of it was a mistake. Some of the stuff they did seems to me in retrospect really smart, and a lot of that was just staying out of my way. That sounds awful, but like, you know, trusting the decisions I was making, realizing that even if they weren't happy, you know, and even if this wasn't a choice that I was going to make me happy, once you're 20 or 21, you kind of have to let people make their choices and live with the consequences. So they did not guilt me in the least about that choice. I don't remember them being like cheering, like, woohoo, yes, we always knew, we're so happy you're going to be an English major. You know, they were supportive. They just kind of, yeah, I don't remember much commentary about it, which was good because I think I feared probably, you know, displeasing them or making them unhappy. Or at least, you know, they were paying, I took out a lot of loans, but they were also paying in part for my college education. So I felt some responsibility to make it, not to make the choice they wanted me to make, but to not misspend their money on my college education. So they were pretty good about it, I've got to say, to be fair.
Yeah, my parents, not so much.
Interesting. They were disappointed or just concerned?
Well, I would say my mother has no valuable opinions about anything. But in the case of my father, I come from a family of immigrants.
Right.
I'm first generation born in the States.
Right.
For some reason, my parents, it was always the plan that I would go to college.
Right.
But they never thought farther than that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It was just like, yeah, he goes to college because that's going to be good.
Right.
My father never really prescribed or encouraged a direction in any particular direction.
Mm-hmm.
However, it wasn't until I was already going in a particular direction and I was pretty much too far gone that he expressed his concern over what I was doing.
Got it.
Like I told you before, I was originally going to be an astrophysicist.
Right.
I'm pretty sure my father doesn't know what that means.
Right.
But he just knows that's like you work in science a lot. You probably get paid a lot.
Right.
That's cool.
Right.
That'll be good for you.
Right.
And then at some point, when I decided I only ever want to do arts, at some point I dropped out of school because I didn't want to be a physics major anymore.
Right.
When I floundered around a bit and was wondering what I wanted to do, I came upon arts. I want to do film. I told him that, like, I'm going to go back to school because this is what I want to do. He was like, okay, I'm just glad you're going back to school.
Right.
He almost didn't care about what I was doing.
Right. It was the college degree, like the credential.
Yeah. And then when I came into the University of Hartford,
mm-hmm.
I did a year. I went through my first year, straight A's, doing all the things like film classes, English courses.
Right.
Education courses for my certification to teach English,
right.
Music courses. You know, I really hit it out of the park the first year. And then he comes and talks to me about how I guess he didn't realize how the job security is in the entertainment industry.
Right.
He didn't realize what that meant.
Right.
And then I told him that's how it works. It's the most fickle and difficult industry you can try to work in.
Right.
And then that's when he expressed his concern over what I was studying.
Right.
To the point where he's like, why are you doing this then? If you're very certain that your future is uncertain.
Right.
And then I tell him like, well, because I don't know how to do anything else. I don't like doing anything else.
Right.
And then he goes and tells me like, well, you know, your brother, he went to school to get a criminal justice degree, but he can't find a job. So he's going back to school again to get an accounting degree because he knows that's where you can get jobs.
Right.
Why don't you like switch your major, study something else, like go into business or engineering?
Right.
I'm like, and then I tell him like, you know, I'm already too far gone. I'm already a year into all these programs that I'm steadily making progress in. If I switch to a whole nother thing, it's going to take even longer for me to graduate from school.
Right.
And we have to pay even more money because I've already worked out this entire plan where I have to I have to graduate in 4 years. I have to fit all the things, my overflowing curriculum, into 4 years, and because my scholarship is only good for 4 years.
Right. And how did he respond when you said that?
He kept telling me things like, why don't you switch to engineering then? Because to him, it doesn't matter how a university works, how a plan of study works, how credits that count towards requirements work. Right. He just thinks it's easy to say, both saying and doing an entire curriculum change, program and degree change is easy. Right. He thinks that's easy. You just turn around and do stuff. Right. But it's not.
Right. Yeah, certainly not in that time frame.
No.
It's complicated. I mean, it's complicated for parents. I think it's complicated for students too. I mean, the trick with higher education is that it does a lot of different things. Some people come to higher education because they want a very kind of pre-professional path that's going to train them for a particular kind of job or career, and that's okay. You know, other people think about their education differently than that, and it's, especially given the cost of higher education, to be fair, it's harder and harder, I suppose, to justify thinking about pursuing a college degree that allows you to sort of explore interests or learn more about the world and yourself. It's hard to, that's hard to put a number on or a value on. That was kind of true for me too. I mean, as I said, I kind of like my math and science courses. I was doing fine. I remember we went on a kind of plant visit to a big petroleum plant, like a plastics making plant in northern New Jersey, where they were doing all this polymer stuff. So of course, chemical engineers involved, and it was supposed to be a treat. Like, oh, we're going to bring the chemical engineers to this place and show them like big sheets of plastic rolling off this line and huge batch chemical processes in these, sort of enormous, big industrial facilities. And I was kind of horrified. Like, not that it's terrible that, we live in a world where we use plastic for good or ill for various things. It was more like, oh my God, this is what I'm going to be doing. This is where I'm going to be working. And it was the point at which it kind of crystallized for me that I was doing something that was a kind of training for, and this is not to disparage engineering education, but from my perspective at least, it was training for giving me certain skills that I would need to develop to do new things, but to do particular kinds of tasks, as opposed to giving me some kind of ivory tower version, and I don't mean that disparagingly necessarily, of like an education that was going to sort of teach me more about the world and myself, and that I was afraid might be my only opportunity to do that. Like, here I am, I'm 19 or 20 years old. I can take all these courses. I can learn about history and art history and film and literature and, you name it. And I might not have this opportunity to sort of learn so much about the world and by extension about myself now. And I didn't want to give that up, I guess. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with English. I didn't have any plan, like certainly no career plan or job plan per se, that related to the major. I just was what I liked. I was kind of good at it. I felt like I was cultivating skills that were valuable. Yeah, that version of education, or that reason for going to college, I think is harder and harder. It's like the old liberal arts argument, I suppose. It's really hard to sell. And I get why that's the case now, and now my whole life kind of revolves around it, I suppose. Yeah, I can't imagine. I guess this is coming around. I'm thinking about you, Benson. It's coming around to saying sometimes you do things because you can't not do them. I mean, it's the most compelling reason. Like, writers and artists, this is the case, right? Like, why do writers write? Why do musicians make music? I mean, at some level, it's because they can't not do it. That's often the best reason, even if they're not making a living at it, even if they're doing something else that supports them. Like, they're doing that because they want to, because it makes them happy, because it gives their life meaning.
Yeah, in my case, it's more, well, for one, I'm very lazy. And so I don't produce as much stuff as I would like to. Or most of the time, for most of my life, I didn't produce anything at all. But it is more of like I told my father, the reason I want to do this stuff is just like, those are the only things I ever think about all day.
Right.
Like playing music, watching films, or English, the English language. I use it to think.
Right.
And I'm always fascinated by this idea that there are people, writers, artists, and such, who the creative process is boiled down to, they just can't not.
Right.
They're not so much making this stuff up. It's more there's this grand creative energy that just flows through them, and they spit out the work they produce.
Right.
You know, like I had a class with you last semester on John Milton. We spend most of it looking at what is considered his magnum opus, his grand work, Paradise Lost. We discussed how he more or less, I think he did feel, and most people who have read him do feel, that he was just a guy who had to poet. Yeah, he had to poem. He had to write poems and stuff.
Right.
And then also write this grand epic poem about the fall of man.
Right.
And that it was just a thing that came out of him.
Yeah, but I didn't mean to say, because I don't think this is true.
Or rather, it was more he felt a calling to tell this story.
Yeah, I think when people can't not do it, that doesn't mean it's easy. You know,
Yeah.
it's sort of like being an athlete or exercising, right? Like there are people who are run religiously or lift weights religiously or whatever they do. Like they can't not do it, but that doesn't mean it's not work every day to like wake up and make yourself do it. Those things are not mutually exclusive. And I think writing, I certainly think is like that. I mean, making music too. I mean, think about performing artists. So see, we're going to talk about my kids. Both my kids have played music. My younger kid, who's probably more into it, but I don't think is going to try to pursue the performing arts formally, at least as a performer. He loves music. He composes music. He's a percussionist. He plays viola. Even if you're really, really good at the violin, you're practicing all the time.
Yeah.
And even if you're really, really good at the violin and love playing it, you don't always love practicing whatever, your 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 hours a day. Like there is whatever it is, like a discipline or a work, right? There's labor involved in like realizing your gift, let's call it. So yeah, sure. Some people get lucky. They've got long fingers for the piano, whatever. They got perfect pitch. They have a facility for words or for language. I mean, I'm sure some of that is baked in, but that's like part of it. And then you've got to like really work the gift and learn and do all kinds of other stuff. And then you've got to make yourself do it. And that too, I think there are people for whom that's easier or harder. And I mean like the will part of it.
Yeah.
Like there are people that can make themselves do things more easily than other folks.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate kind of like genius, I guess, or talent.
Yeah, like any sort of, you could say, success I've had, there was no groundwork really. I would say I don't have a creative bone in my body. Because when I was growing up, I was still very much science minded. I just looked at everything very empirically, objectively.
Right.
I didn't draw or make up stories or whatever the hell.
Right.
And it's almost like the ultimate character arc for me. I was so math, science, nah.
Right.
And then I discover arts and entertainment, and like I knew I had no musicality, had no raw talent for much of anything other than say math.
Huh.
And me I'm not a creative person, but I want to pursue arts and creative fields. And so I had to build everything from the ground up.
Right.
Like the first thing I ever did was music.
Right.
The first quote unquote art I did was music. It was just because I listened to music. I loved music so much to the point where I just thought, if I like music this much, the next step is to become a musician, right? It wasn't even so much I wanted to play music. To me, music is so ingrained in my life. It's such a given to me.
Right.
I just like being a musician. I would be surprised if anyone I ever met was not a musician, because I think music is the most important thing to me, to the point where I would call it more of a compulsion than an interest.
But I'm a little confused. Like, well, I take your point. Like, I guess you could really love music and be interested in music and feel moved to make it, and it could be harder for one person than the next to do the making. What am I disagreeing with? What am I quibbling about? Is there any kid who's just like pops into the world and suddenly starts drumming a guitar or singing? I mean, I guess kids can vocalize.
Mozart.
Yeah, I mean, he was crazy cultivated by his family, though, wasn't he? I'm speaking about stuff I don't know about to some degree. I wonder about that relationship between being naturally talented and simply like liking something.
I suppose in my case, it was a matter of convergence of my love for music,
right,
and my penchant for committing to things,
right.
Because I bought a guitar, and I was like, I'm gonna learn guitar. It wasn't so much I wanted to learn guitar. I was just like, I looked at a guitar, and I said, I want to be good at guitar.
Right.
I don't care if I don't like it.
Right.
If I love music this much, I'm going to be a musician. And the only way to make being a musician worth it is being good at it.
Right.
And so I just almost absent-mindedly practiced for hours.
Right.
Because I wanted to be good at guitar.
Yeah.
And then
that's the can't not, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't not do this.
On some way, you could say I was concentrating because I was actively learning guitar.
Right.
But it was just, music is so important to me. It was a compulsion for me to just, whenever I just got bored for a minute, I just grab my guitar, strum along, just strum on it, and just practice, and end up being like an hour.
Right.
Not so much because I planned it to be, but because it's just, that's where music is like one of the few places where I feel comfortable doing stuff.
Right. That and in front of the microphone. See, for me, this is kind of lame, but to some degree, that's reading for me. That's why I brought up Schopenhauer before, and I'm not going to remember the quote, but just because my kid's in this course, I Googled Schopenhauer, and he said something about the fact that like there's never anything wrong with him or with the world that an hour's reading won't cure, which is sort of the therapeutic part of reading for me. Like I'm always at home if I'm reading something I enjoy reading. Like it's very, like I read before I go to bed. I find it very settling. And in fact, I kind of need to, like if someone's interrupting me or trying to talk to me while I'm in my like little pre-bed reading routine, I don't get irritable exactly. It's just that like that simply pushes back the period I need to read because I find it, I don't know where that comes from, but it's always been soothing to me. That makes it sound weirdly like balm or something. It's also an intellectual activity, obviously to some degree, but it is like, I don't know. Reading has always been that for me. Comforting in a way, in a good way. And since it's still a relatively, all things considered, cheap and easy vice, that's good. One of my big pleasures is he's obviously not an English major, but my older kid now likes reading for pleasure. So he does a lot of reading over the summer, can't so much during the school year. And I think increasingly, this is weird though, this is that like the narcissism of parenthood where you kind of like want your kids to be like you, but this is the good side of it, right? I think he takes the kind of pleasure and consolation in reading that I do. So I'm just happy that it's a way that he can have pleasure. And I think about my teaching that way too, right? Like I teach a lot of particular things. There are particular things I care about, I suppose, texts and historical periods, whatever. But I think mostly when I'm teaching English, what I most hope for my students is that they can use reading in the ways that I think it's useful. That's partly to learn stuff, but it also is this kind of meditative component of like the reading experience.
Yeah. As part of my curriculum last semester, which included your class on Milton,
right,
and 3 other like kind of high level, really English majory specific courses,
right,
that was the first time I learned about close reading,
right.
Which I know kind of late to the party, but I learned, the close reading of text, the learning about it, it fundamentally changed the way I read, and it rewired my brain to look at not only texts differently, but also like films.
Yeah.
And realizing the subtext that comments on the text itself.
Right.
To the point where I remember with Dr. Rivera in the World Lit class, I read this section of this book called Farming of Bones real cursory, and my brain was kind of on fire that day. I'm not sure how I mean if it's good or bad, but it was just like I was in class, we were in a circle discussing the book, and I was able to throw out like 2 or 3 different interpretations of each little section of text that we were going over, and I was surprising myself because it just like popped in my head, like, oh yeah, this thought connects to that. It can this interpretation,
right?
And again, it feeds into other disciplines like film.
Yeah,
especially with film, you have not only like dialogue but also all of the frame in which to interpret,
right?
And even texts that are not in, say, modern English,
right?
Like Paradise Lost,
right?
I wrote a paper on Paradise Lost that I felt might have been my crowning achievement in terms of really interpreting and processing a text that is not written by like Philip Roth in the past 50 years.
Right. And be honest, isn't it a little fun to do that?
It is.
Yeah.
Because whenever we think about writing papers, it's like, was just, I don't know how to write papers. But now I think I finally have it down. All you're doing is telling people what you think.
Right.
But you just have to be able to attach it to textual evidence. And all you have to do is reveal your thought process behind whatever interpretation or claim you're trying to make.
Right.
You know, that paper I wrote about Paradise Lost, it was like Milton's way of fucking with time throughout the entire poem.
Yeah, it was a good paper.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. Did you get your paper back? You've got to come pick your paper up if you haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I didn't see you because I submitted it the day last day of classes.
It was the very end. So, yeah,
and
I mean that's the other part of it. I think is that there's always that fear, and it's a kind of cliche, I suppose. Right, the notion that like talking about something or criticizing it or interpreting it kind of kills the pleasure. I've never thought that's true. I mean, bad interpretations maybe, or boring
or not interpreting
text.
And when people think about writing papers, they don't think about how it's an interpretation and unpacking of the text.
Right.
They just think like, oh, it's like you have to write about it, and it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
But in the end, if you're doing it right, if you're reading it right, and you're writing about it correctly, I find it's really enriching and invigorating to have all these layers of whatever you're reading unfold itself upon you.
Yeah, that's right. It's another layer of pleasure. I mean, that's the way I always think of it. I mean, I think, when you're teaching an introductory literature course to maybe people who aren't big readers, you're kind of hoping they might read some more because you think it'll be good for them, but also just because it's another source of pleasure, right? Like, who doesn't need more sources of, innocent pleasure, innocent fun? So, reading is pleasurable. It's fun. Yeah. You can also learn a lot of things from it. But then there are these other layers of ancillary pleasure related to that, like the fun, the pleasure of like thinking hard about a text and making sense of it and making meaning. That's fun too. It's a fun related to but distinct from like the fun of reading the poem or listening to the song. It's sort of like listening to music and understanding a little bit about like whatever it is, like sonata form or you name it. And then you can explain to yourself or make sense of like how that thing works. That's a pleasure too.
Yeah.
Being able to do that is its own kind of creative act. Like it's a different kind of creative act. It's not like writing a poem or writing a novel, but figuring out how you think it works and then putting together a compelling explanation of how time works in Paradise Lost. That's a kind of creation too. I mean, I always, I sometimes say to students that the paper writing that they do, the analytical paper writing they do should be fun. And especially for creative writers, that it is like there's a creative aspect of it. Like you're trying to use words wisely. You're trying to craft something in the same way that you might write a song or, write a contemporary sonnet. Yeah. It's its own creative act.
Yeah. I've come into this place where I can realize I can apply close reading to, say, music.
Mm-hmm.
The way with the most recent example I can think of that was shown to me was have you seen Avengers Endgame?
I have not seen it yet.
Well, there's this at the end. Maybe you're familiar with just generally what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone comes back,
right?
And they're about the huge fight at the end, right?
Okay.
The piece of music by Alvin Silvestri that plays is called Portals, and in that one piece of music, it changes keys 6 times. It modulates 6 times. You can think of that as a thematic connection to the fact that there are 6 infinity stones.
Mm-hmm.
And the way and it ends so it starts in G minor and then it ends up in E. I can't remember if it was minor or major, but that distance, that interval is a major sixth.
Mm-hmm.
6 key changes, distance of a sixth, 6 infinity stones. That kind of stuff exists in music too.
Right. That's right. And you can listen, you can be a total music numbskull or just like uninformed and enjoy the music. And that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then there can be the pleasure of like noticing that that's going on and realizing this other layer of the meaning of the music that is, again, that's just another kind of pleasure. A kind of intellectual pleasure, I guess. And
just so you can blow smoke in my ass, I would like to know what you thought about my Milton paper.
Well, you have to come get it. I wrote comments on it.
Other than that, it was good. Anything off the top of your head?
I mean, it's been months now, Benson. You did very well. I know I thought highly of it.
It was all about, a lot of it was kind of a meta commentary about.
It was about Milton's play with time.
Playing with time,
right?
and like narrative.
Yeah.
With, say, the fact that at the end, Michael, the Archangel Michael,
right,
was showing Adam like on the Garden of Eden holodeck, like Bible stories,
right,
including the Moses and the Israelites,
right,
and how Moses is traditionally attributed to authorship of the first few books of the Bible,
right,
which includes Genesis. So it's like Milton is retelling an event in the book of Genesis with Adam looking at Moses, who was the author of Genesis. Right. So it's like this huge kind of recursive narrative mess that just folds in on itself.
Right. Yeah, because partly Michael is giving Adam a preview of the events to come that from the perspective of Milton and his readers certainly are events not only in the deep past, but also not in a past that they've personally experienced, and in the past that they only have access to through the text of the writer that Milton sees before he's a writer, right? The experiencer. Yeah, that stuff is fascinating in Paradise Lost, I think. Milton's play with time, which is so deliberate, right? I mean, because we see him doing it in other places so explicitly too, like playing around with the relationship between Christianity or Christian versions of stories and pre-existing pagan versions that Milton kind of predates by suggesting that in fact there's a Christian story that makes those pagan stories possible before the advent of historical Christianity. Yeah. So it was a good paper topic.
It was.
Among other things. Because that move, it's not a single move, but that move of play with time and timescales is like one of the crucial things about Paradise Lost. There's so many versions of that too, because of course Milton is retelling a story that sort of happens in a past and that's done in a sense.
And then in the middle of it, he's having like characters retell other things that may have already happened or will happen, like in the case of Michael showing Adam visions of quote unquote future Bible stories.
That's right. And then some of those, stories also have this kind of liturgical aspect, which is to say that they are, they happened, but then they always happen too, right? There's some notion that the story of Adam and Eve isn't just the story of Adam and Eve, it's the story of all humankind, and therefore it's all of our stories. Yeah. So it's both localizable in a certain kind of past, mythic or otherwise, or historical. If like Milton, you think those people, those individuals really existed. But then there's some way in which they are simply types for all humans. So this is a story that's the story of human weakness that's always and forever sort of repeated.
Yeah.
Right?
One of the bits of my paper was I remember when we were reading book 9 of Paradise Lost, when Eve does eat the apple, you made an observation about how it says she eat.
Right.
But you would pronounce it et. Right. Because that was a very archaic way of articulating ate, the past tense.
Right.
But given our modern interpretation of the word eat as being present tense, it's it's a commentary on how this state of fallenness is perpetual and has become almost timeless. It's before, during, and after it all at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a single word and a single kind of verbal cue that kind of sort of encapsulates that complicated relationship with time.
And I made a very good mental note of that so I could put in my paper.
Well, you were paying attention.
Yeah.
That's good. And less common than one might hope in classes. Maybe just mine.
But also, full disclosure.
Yes.
I did submit that paper late, technically late.
Did you?
I did. Because what happened was, it was due on a Monday, right? That would have been the last day of classes.
Okay.
And I was up all night writing other papers and yours. And, I made it through. I had pretty much no sleep for a couple of days. I was able to drive to the university uninjured. And I made it through the last day of classes. And then I drove home again. Surprisingly, didn't swerve into a pole or a parked car. And then I opened the document because I was going to write one more paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been the first body paragraph.
Right.
And then I lay down for a second and then just passed out.
Oh, I remember this story now. But if it was not really late, didn't you submit it that night or something?
I think, okay, so I would have gotten home at 6 p.m. or something like that.
Right.
Maybe 5 or 6 p.m. And then I'm like, I'm going to open the document. I have one more paragraph I want to put in there.
Right.
To make sure that it feels as complete as I want it to be. Oh, and also the conclusion. but then I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. But then I lay down for a second, just passed right the fuck out.
Right.
And then I wake up and it's 3:30 a.m. I'm like, holy shit, I forgot to wake up to write and submit this. And so I'm like, I don't have time to write a whole other paragraph. I'm just going to write the conclusion and then I send it to Mark and hope he doesn't kill me.
And I didn't. I don't think. Yeah, I shouldn't reveal my slackness in this regard publicly on Benson's soon-to-be viral podcast. Can podcasts go viral? I guess.
I suppose.
Yeah, that was a close enough, right? It's not like the paper comes in. That wasn't even a day late. It was I'm a couple hours behind.
Because
yeah.
My mind and body physically could not go on and just shut down.
It happens. It was still a good paper. You did fine.
All right.
I'm unsettled. I feel like I'm in a casino. Listeners won't know this, but we're in a room without windows under
fluorescent lighting,
and there are no clocks in the room. So, and I'm a really bad judge of things, as Benson, having been in my classes many times, can attest. So it's 15 minutes could have passed, 2 hours could have passed. I have no idea. Are we running past your deadline, Benson?
Mark, you should wear a watch.
I know I should wear a watch.
But
is that a Casio?
It is.
There was just an article in either the New York Times or the New Yorker about how that is one of the greatest technologies of the last 30 years, and it's underappreciated.
I would say yes.
Casio watch.
Especially because I don't wear jewelry or anything because I really do not care.
Right.
And so I see all these people who fancy watches on.
Right.
I'm like, what? That's jewelry.
Right.
The most jewelry thing I wear is a digital watch.
Yeah.
Made out of what is rubber and plastic.
Yeah. Yeah. They're super accurate. They last forever.
Yeah.
They're quite functional.
And so this thing breaks because I bend it a lot to take it off and whatever.
Right. But then you can get another one for $20. They're also
or just replace the strap.
Yeah, or replace the strap. There you go.
But I think we've gone on long enough. This is about the typical length of an episode.
Okay, that's good. I think I'm late to meet an advisee who's probably out there wondering where I am.
Okay,
so
I have to go run the class.
Okay, that's another good reason to stop.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure.
Cool. All right, cool.
That was fun.